He woke with a start, breath unsteady, the echo of a woman's soft breathing still lingering in his ears, though the room around him was empty now. Morning light cut through the blinds in thin, unforgiving lines. Landing on the wrinkled suit jacket he didn't remember taking off, and the second pillow on his bed that hadn't been touched in years. Michael sat there for a long moment, elbows on his knees, trying to steady the shake in his hands. His home was silent in that way. Only a lived-in alone house could be clean, orderly, and hollow. A mug from last night sat on the counter, the tea inside cold, a ring of dried honey marking the place where he had meant to finish it. He was a man used to control, used to knowing what had happened the night before. But today, the only thing he knew for sure was the heaviness in his chest, and the blurred image of someone beside him in a hotel room he shouldn't have woken up in. A man who'd spent years building a life of order now found himself afraid of a single missing memory. And if you've ever felt the quiet panic of realizing you might lose something or someone before you even had the chance to understand it, this story may stay with you. Let's begin. Michael Hayes opened his eyes to a ceiling he didn't recognize, its pale beige panels blurring into one another as if the morning light itself wanted to spare him the truth. A soft breath rose and fell beside him. For a moment, he lay still, listening. The sound so close, it tightened something in his chest. He turned his head just enough to see a curtain of brown hair on the pillow next to his Laura Kent's hair, spilling in loose waves across her cheek. He froze. The air felt thin, like a room shut too long. The last thing he remembered was clinking glasses at the company gala, the ballroom filled with gold lights, and the dull ache in his shoulders from smiling longer than any man his age should be expected to. After that, everything dissolved into a blur of music and warm voices. But this was not something he had even imagined possible. Laura stirred lightly, adjusting her arm without waking. She was fully clothed. He was too. That should have brought relief. But it didn't. The implications lived a life of their own. Michael pushed himself upright slowly, careful not to wake her. His suit jacket hung crookedly off a chair. Her heels sat near the minibar. 2 champagne bottles lay empty on the carpet, one rolling slightly as the air vent clicked on. A hotel room at the Riverbend Grand, a place he'd stayed during conferences, never for anything personal. His stomach tightened. He didn't do this. Not anymore. Not after the divorce. Not after promising himself he'd never bring complication into his professional life again. He rubbed his eyes, trying to separate memory from imagination. Nothing came, just a sense of talking too much, laughing too hard, and wanting desperately to forget the ache of going home alone. A soft groan came from the pillow beside him. Laura shifted, blinking as she pushed her hair back. Her gaze traveled from the bedspread to him, and then to the unfamiliar room. Her face drained of color. "Oh, God," she whispered. He tried to sound steady. "We're dressed. Nothing happened. I don't remember anything," she said, voice trembling. "Why don't I remember?" He didn't have an answer. The fear in her eyes carved something deep inside him, something he hadn't expected. She was his assistant, competent and composed, always calm when things fell apart. Seeing her shaken unsettled him more than waking in the wrong bed. "We must have talked," he offered. "Maybe we were too tired to drive." But even he didn't believe the half-formed guesses. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, pressing her palms against her temples. Her phone lay on the nightstand, its screen lit with a flood of missed messages. Before she could reach for it, the device buzzed again, sharp and insistent. Michael watched her hesitate before picking it up. She drew a slow breath and looked. Her expression changed instantly. First confusion, then panic sharp enough to tremble through her fingers. She swallowed hard and handed him the phone with a hand that wouldn't stay still. Dozens of texts from coworkers. "Are you okay? Saw you two leaving together. Call me ASAP. This is going to explode Monday. There are pictures," she whispered. "Someone saw us." Michael felt the ground tilt under him. The annual gala was a closed event, but employees always lingered around the lobby afterward, snapping photos, teasing supervisors, trying to catch something interesting. It didn't take much a wrong angle, a tired moment, two people walking too close to turn whispers into something more. He didn't know how late they'd stayed. He didn't know what they'd looked like when they left that ballroom. He tried to remember her at some point during the night, her laugh warm, her shoulders tense from work, the way she relaxed slightly when the wine softened the edges of her stress. He remembered wanting her to have a lighter evening. He didn't remember seeing her leave with him. Laura held her phone with both hands now, as if steadying it might steady her. "My dad depends on my paycheck," she said quietly. "I can't afford rumors." He wanted to say he understood, but the truth was harsher. Rumors weren't the danger. Power dynamics were. A 48-year-old vice president and a 39-year-old assistant leaving a gala together. Even if they had done nothing, a story could be spun in any direction. "We'll clear this up," he said, though uncertainty pulled at every word. She shook her head. "People will think what they want." He turned toward the window. Morning light slid through the sheer curtains, soft and indifferent. Cars passed below, tiny and distant. Life outside moved without hesitation, while inside the room, everything felt suspended in a kind of fragile silence. He thought of the promises he'd made to himself, the lines he never crossed, the version of his life he'd tried to rebuild after everything fell apart. And now, sitting in the glow of a hotel sunrise, he felt the weight of a mistake he couldn't even remember making. Laura checked her messages again. "We need to figure out what happened," she murmured. "Who saw us? What they think they saw?" Michael nodded slowly. There was a knot forming in his chest, tightening each time her voice shook. He had spent years managing crises, but this wasn't a spreadsheet or a staffing issue. This was a person he respected, someone who didn't deserve to be caught in the fallout of whatever had gone wrong. He looked at the champagne bottles, the scattered clothes, the faint smudge of makeup on his sleeve. None of it offered answers, only questions. "How did we end up here?" he asked, more to himself than to her. Laura didn't respond. She stared down at her phone, watching another message appear. Her thumb hovered, hesitated, then set the phone down as though it had burned her. She looked at him, eyes wide with a fear he hadn't seen in her before. Michael. What if this is only the beginning? The question hung in the still air of the room, and neither of them knew how to breathe around it. Back in his quiet house, Michael noticed the thin line of dust on the second pillow, the one no one had used in 5 years. He stood at the bedroom doorway longer than necessary, the late morning sun falling across the bed in soft, uneven stripes. The pillow looked untouched, as if it belonged to a life he no longer stepped into. He brushed the dust off with the side of his hand, watching the particles lift into the air like tiny ghosts before settling again. The silence inside the house felt thicker than usual, carrying a weight that pressed against his ribs. He loosened his tie, not because it was tight, but because something inside him was... His jacket slipped from his shoulder, landing across the back of an armchair he rarely sat in. Everything here looked arranged, curated, even comfortable in a way, but it never felt lived in. It felt like a museum someone walked through quietly, hands behind their back. He made his way to the kitchen, where a half-finished bag of ground coffee sat beside a clean, empty mug. He filled the kettle and leaned on the counter as it heated, his eyes wandering to the window. The backyard beyond the glass was neat, trimmed, almost painfully orderly. He had spent years trying to keep it that way, as if neatness could keep loneliness at the edges. He picked up his phone, hesitating before checking his messages, mostly work emails, a brief weather alert, a text from his son, short and distant. "Hey, Dad. Sorry. Can't make dinner this weekend." No explanation, no apology beyond the obligatory word, just a reminder that the gap between them stayed wide, even after years of trying to bridge it. He typed a response. "Another time. Take care of yourself." Then deleted it, rewriting it in a shorter, more formal tone. When he finally sent it, he set the phone face down and stared at the kettle steaming, feeling a question tug at him from somewhere deep. Why had last night shaken him this way? Was it the fear of scandal? Or was it the strange, unspoken closeness he couldn't quite remember? Across town, Laura unlocked the door to the small two-bedroom home she rented in a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of place where neighbors waved from their driveways and everyone cut their lawns on Saturdays. She pushed the door with her hip, juggling her purse and the small bag of groceries she'd picked up on the way. "Dad, I'm home," she called, her voice gentle but carrying a tiredness that lived deeper than the lack of sleep. There was no reply, only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. She set the groceries down and crossed the hallway to her father's room. He lay in bed, still asleep, his breathing slow and uneven. His hands rested on top of the blanket, the knuckles swollen from years of hard work. She tucked the covers up around his chest and switched the lamp to its lowest setting. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She stepped into the living room before checking it, not wanting the sound to disturb him. It wasn't more messages about the hotel or the rumors, thankfully. It was a reminder for her father's medication, and a voicemail from the clinic asking to confirm his appointment next Tuesday. She listened, nodding to herself as she walked into the kitchen and filled a glass of water. She would handle it, she always did. But beneath the routine, the schedules, the pills, the grocery runs lay a fatigue she rarely acknowledged. It wasn't the exhaustion of physical labor, it was the slow erosion of carrying too much alone. She placed the glass on the counter and lowered herself into a chair, letting her shoulders drop. Images from the morning drifted back Michael in that hotel room, the quiet shock in his eyes, the way he looked away when he realized how vulnerable both of them were. She rubbed her forehead, trying to piece together the night the way one might try to recreate a dream fading too quickly. Something nudged at her memory, a warmth, laughter, string lights glowing overhead. She unlocked her phone, scrolling through the photos from the gala. Most were blurry, her co-workers posing near the bar. The ballroom's gold lighting streaked across the frame. But then she saw it, a picture she didn't remember taking. She and Michael stood beneath a row of warm white lights, their faces turned slightly toward each other. He wasn't smiling, not exactly, but there was a softness in his expression. She had never seen it work, something almost boyish, almost hopeful. Her own eyes were half closed as if mid-laugh. Her hand lifted near her mouth the way she always did when something genuinely amused her. She traced the screen lightly with her thumb, feeling her chest tighten. It wasn't the photo itself that shook her. It was the feeling that radiated from it. They looked like two people who trusted each other, two people finding ease in a moment neither had planned. But she couldn't remember that moment at all. She tried squeezing her eyes shut, leaning back in the chair, but nothing surfaced beyond the faint outline of his voice, saying something low and honest. It made her heart ache in a way she hadn't expected. The photo blurred slightly as her eyes filled. She blinked it away and pressed the phone closer, searching for more clues. There were no others, just the one. One blurry, beautiful moment that felt impossibly intimate. Why couldn't she remember? A quiet panic stirred in her stomach, blending uneasily with something else, curiosity, longing, maybe even fear of what the missing memory might reveal. She stared at the photo until the screen dimmed and her reflection replaced the two of them. For a second, she hardly recognized herself. Michael was probably home by now, she thought, sitting in his tidy house, replaying the same fragments she was trying to piece together. She wondered if he remembered anything more. She wondered if, deep down, he wished he did. She set the phone aside and rested her forehead against her clasped hands. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice, then fell silent again. The house felt small, smaller than usual, and the quiet pressed closer. She reached for the phone again, staring at the image as if it held an answer. But all it offered was a question that grew heavier with each passing minute. Why had a moment that looked so honest disappeared from her memory? And what did it mean that she wished she could hold on to it now? The office air felt different that morning, too watchful, too quiet. As Michael stepped out of the elevator, he felt it settle on him, the way humidity settles on skin, heavy and unwelcome. The hallway lights were bright, almost sharp, reflecting off the polished floors with a cold shine that made everything seem too exposed. He adjusted the strap of his leather bag and walked forward, pretending not to notice the two junior analysts who stopped talking when they saw him. Their eyes flickered away, then turned back the moment he passed. He didn't hear the words, but he knew their shape, the small, hushed syllables of speculation. He told himself to keep walking. He'd been in business long enough to recognize when a rumor had started to grow legs. He reached his office and closed the door more quickly than he meant to. The familiar space mahogany desk, framed certificates, a muted landscape painting usually steadied him. Today, it felt like a stage. He set his bag down and exhaled slowly, but the pressure in his chest refused to loosen. He hadn't slept much, replaying the details of the morning, the hotel room, Laura's frightened expression, the unanswered questions. He had told her they would handle it, but he wasn't sure how. His computer chimed softly. He sat and pulled up his inbox. New message threads, subject lines with vague hints. Regarding last night, need clarification. Check-in colleagues never wrote that early unless something had unsettled them. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He knew what this was about, and he knew he couldn't erase it. A knock sounded light, hesitant. He turned. Laura stood at the door, her hand still on the frame as if she wasn't sure she should be there. Her expression was composed, but her eyes were tired. It wasn't makeup or clothing that betrayed her fatigue. It was the way she carried her shoulders, slightly forward, as if bracing for impact. "Good morning," she said quietly. He nodded. "Come in." She stepped inside and closed the door, the soft click echoing too loudly in the room. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She held a file folder to her chest like a shield. "People are talking," she said finally. Her voice was controlled, but he could hear the tremor she tried to bury. "I know," he answered. "I walked by the break room. 2 people stopped mid-sentence when I came in." She swallowed. One of them asked if I had recovered from last night. "I don't even know what that means." Michael felt heat rise in his neck. "I'm sorry. You don't deserve any of this." "It's not your fault," she replied automatically, but her fingers tightened on the folder. He wished he could say something stronger, something that would ease the anxiety he saw in her eyes. But he didn't know how to comfort someone when he was drowning in the same uncertainty. A shadow passed across the glass panel of his office door, someone walking by, slowly, as if hoping to catch a glimpse. Laura shifted, subtly turning her back to the glass. "Let's sit," he said, gesturing toward the chairs by his desk. She nodded and lowered herself into one, smoothing her skirt with steady movements that didn't match the tension in her jaw. A moment passed, then another. "Michael," she said softly, "someone told Aaron from accounting that they saw us, holding each other outside the hotel." He sat straighter, holding each other. "That's what they said." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I don't know what they think they saw." He searched his memory, pushing through the haze of the night before. He remembered laughter, the soft glow of lights, the warmth of her presence. Had he leaned on her? Had she leaned on him? Or had someone seen 2 exhausted adults supporting each other and painted their own story around it? He didn't know, and that scared him. Laura looked down at her lap. "I've never been the subject of gossip here. It feels humiliating." He leaned forward slightly. "You've done nothing wrong. That won't matter to some people." Her words hung heavy in the room. He noticed the faint tremble in her fingers. The urge to reach out and steady her rose up instinctively, surprising him in its intensity. But he held still. Any gesture from him could be misinterpreted or worse, used against her. "Do you want me to talk to HR first?" He asked. "No," she said quickly. "If you do that, it'll look like you're trying to control the narrative. I don't want them to think you're influencing me." He nodded, understanding. The very nature of their positions made everything precarious. Footsteps echoed again outside his door. More than one pair, more whispers. The kind people think are quiet enough, but never are. Michael felt something twist inside him, protectiveness, anger, shame all fused together. He had lived through scandals before, corporate battles and office politics. But those had never involved someone who didn't deserve to be collateral damage. A soft chime sounded on Laura's phone. She glanced down. Her expression tightened. "What is it?" he asked. She hesitated before turning the screen toward him. An email notification blinked. HR department request for meeting 10:30 a.m. He felt the air go still. "When did this come in?" he asked. "Just now," she said. "It's addressed to both of us." Michael straightened, every instinct in him sharpening. HR never called private meetings without preparation. They never reached out simultaneously unless they believed something significant had occurred, or unless someone had reported them. He looked at her quietly. She looked back, trying to steady her breath. "They already think they know something?" she murmured. "But what exactly?" The question lingered between them, pulling the room into deeper silence, and neither of them knew how close they were to learning an answer they might not be ready for. The conference room felt colder than usual, as if the walls were bracing for something ugly. Michael stepped inside first, holding the door for Laura, though the gesture felt painfully inadequate compared to what she was walking into. The blinds were drawn halfway, cutting the morning light into sharp stripes across the table. Every line of shadow looked like a warning. Laura sat near the end of the table, folding her hands tightly in her lap. Her posture was straight, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her breath caught before she released it. He took the chair beside her, not too close, not too far, and waited. Two HR representatives entered with clipboards and unreadable expressions. The older one, a woman named Diane, gave a thin professional smile that never reached her eyes. The younger one, Mark, set a folder at the center of the table with the deliberate weight of someone who believed the facts inside were damning. "Thank you both for coming in," Diane began, her tone neutral, too neutral. "We've received reports regarding your conduct at the gala last night." The word conduct felt like sand in Michael's ears. Laura kept her gaze fixed on the table. "Reports?" she asked, her voice steady in a way that cost her something. Diane nodded. "Several employees expressed concerns about inappropriate behavior between the two of you. Specifically, concerns about a possible personal relationship." Michael's chest tightened. "We don't have a personal relationship." Mark lifted an eyebrow. "You arrived at the hotel together." "No," Michael said. "We left the gala around the same time. That's all." "And you stayed in the same hotel room," Diane added calmly. Michael felt Laura flinch. "We don't know how that happened," she said quickly. "But nothing inappropriate occurred. We were fully clothed." Diane raised a hand gently, as though soothing a frightened animal. "We are not making accusations. Laura, we're trying to understand the situation before it escalates." Before it escalates. The phrase landed hard, like something already falling. Michael leaned forward. "We were both exhausted. The night was longer than expected. We had more to drink than we should have. But whatever happened, there was no romantic intention, no misconduct." Mark tapped his pen. "Intent doesn't negate perception." Michael felt heat creep up his neck. Perception based on what rumors a few photos taken out of context. "That's what we're trying to determine," Diane said softly, but her expression remained stern. Laura shifted in her chair, clasping her hands tighter. He could tell she was fighting the urge to defend herself more fervently. But fear I'll lose my job if I push too hard kept her composed. Diane continued. "As you know, our company policy clearly states that if a supervisor and subordinate enter into a personal relationship, romantic or otherwise, one party must resign or transfer." "We are not in a relationship," Michael repeated, slower this time, as if the weight of every word had doubled. "But you did spend the night together," Mark said. Laura swallowed hard. "We didn't. Nothing happened." Diane tilted her head sympathetically. "And yet, you woke up in the same room." Laura's face flushed with humiliation. For a moment, she looked smaller than she was, as if the chair itself were swallowing her. Michael hated the sight. He hated how powerless he felt. He tried to steady his voice. "We're telling you the truth." Diane folded her hands. "Then help us understand what we're seeing in these reports." "What reports?" Michael asked. Mark opened the folder and slid a sheet across the table. "This is one of them." On the page was a written statement from a department head. "Saw Mr. Hayes and Ms. Kent walking arm in arm toward the hotel entrance. Appeared physically close, unclear if romantic but concerning given reporting structure. Laura drew in a sharp breath. Arm in arm, Michael felt something hollow open inside him. He pulled the photo closer, studying the grainy black and white image clipped to the report. It was taken from across the street, blurry from motion, but unmistakably them. His hand was around her forearm. Her head leaned slightly toward him. He searched for the memory, anything that would explain it, but his mind remained fogged, uncooperative. Diane watched them carefully. We're not here to punish anyone, but we need clarity. Did one of you help the other walk? Were you unsteady? Were you comforting each other? We don't know, Michael admitted, the words bitter on his tongue. We don't remember enough. Diane exchanged a look with Mark too quick, too understanding of something unspoken. So, you're saying, she said slowly, that you cannot confirm or deny that there was physical intimacy. Laura reeled back slightly as if struck. No, she whispered. That's not what we're saying. Michael clenched his jaw. We're saying we don't remember leaning on each other, but it's possible one of us was unsteady, which could still imply closeness. Mark murmured. That's not fair, Laura said, her voice cracking. Diane leaned back in her chair, folding her arms gently. We aren't here to assign blame, but we need to know if there's a risk of inappropriate dynamics between a supervisor and an assistant. Laura looked down, shoulders trembling with restraint. Michael wanted to reach for her, to shield her from this interrogation, but he couldn't not without making everything worse. Mark pulled out another photo, sliding it across the table. This one was clearer. They were indeed walking arm in arm. Her hand rested lightly on his forearm. His head was inclined toward hers, as if he were saying something meant only for her. The sight made Michael's breath falter. Why had he held her like that? Why had she leaned toward him so gently? What had passed between them in those lost minutes? And why did the forgotten moment feel like something his chest now ached to remember? The silence in the room grew sharper, the air heavier. Diane finally spoke. Given this evidence, we need a written statement from both of you by end of day. Until then, consider the matter under review. Michael nodded slowly, though the movement felt disconnected from his body. Laura stared at the photo with wide, stunned eyes. He could see the question forming inside her before she whispered it aloud, barely audible. Why were we holding each other like that? The room had no answer, and neither did he. A scent roasted coffee and rain flashed a memory across Laura's mind. It came to her as she stood in her small kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, the morning light faint against the gray clouds gathering outside her window. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of everything that had unfolded at work. But the scent, sudden and strangely vivid, cut through it all. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she wasn't in her kitchen anymore. The string lights above her cast warm, uneven circles on the patio floor. She remembered the soft hum of music drifting from the indoor ballroom, muffled by the closed doors. The night air had been cool, carrying the smell of damp stone after a brief drizzle earlier. She could hear muted laughter from inside, but the patio itself was quiet, just the two of them, sitting with half-finished drinks between them. She saw herself leaning back in the wooden chair, arms crossed loosely, listening to Michael speak. He wasn't the composed, distant executive people saw in the office. He looked tired. Not physically, but the kind of tiredness that settled into a person over years. His suit jacket was draped over the back of the chair. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows. The simple gesture made him look younger, more human, less unreachable. She remembered the way he stared into his glass for a long moment before exhaling softly. My house is quiet, he had said. Too quiet. It used to annoy me when my son would stomp upstairs or slam doors. Now the silence feels louder. She had looked at him then, not out of curiosity, but out of recognition. She knew that silence, the kind that didn't soothe, the kind that reminded you of everything missing. He had continued in that low, careful voice. My ex-wife remarried 2 years ago. My son lives 3 states away. We're fine. Or at least we say we are. He'd let out a hollow laugh. Most nights, I walk through that house and it feels like a museum of a life I used to have. Laura remembered leaning her elbows on the table, lifting her chin just slightly. Do you still miss it? She had asked. Not the house, she knew he meant something deeper. His eyes had softened, the edges of his guarded expressions falling away. I miss having something to come home to. Someone who knows what kind of day I've had without me explaining it. Her chest tightened at the memory. It had been such a simple confession. Not romantic, not intentional, just honest. The kind of honesty that came out only when two people were exhausted and the night was too gentle to fight. She opened her eyes. The kettle whistled softly, pulling her back to the present. But the memory lingered, warm and disorienting. She turned off the stove and poured water into her mug, hands trembling slightly. Why had she forgotten that moment until now? She walked to the living room, sat on the couch, and wrapped her fingers around the mug. Rain tapped softly against the window, and the sound unlocked another piece of the night. She saw Michael leaning back in his chair, the string lights catching faint lines on his face, lines carved by years of restraint, responsibility, and quiet grief. His expression softened further as he looked at her. "You're easy to talk to," he had said. "I didn't expect that." The words echoed inside her, gentler than she remembered. She had smiled, then tired, but genuine. "You're easy to listen to." They had laughed about something she couldn't recall what exactly. Something small, something ordinary. But she remembered the feeling it left behind, a warmth that settled between them, steady and uncomplicated. She lifted her mug to her lips, taking a slow sip as more fragments returned. The two of them had sat in silence at one point, not awkward silence, but the kind shared by people who understood each other without effort. She remembered the sound of water dripping from the gutters above, the flicker of the string lights, the faint chill of the night settling on her shoulders. And then she remembered him looking at her, his voice quieter than before. "I haven't laughed like this in years." The memory struck deep, like something precious she hadn't realized she'd lost. She set the mug down on the coffee table, breath catching in her throat. Why had that moment disappeared into the fog of the night? Why had it taken a random scent in her kitchen to bring it back? The memory didn't feel like a mistake. It felt real, true. That made everything at work, the rumors, the HR meeting, the photos feel even more complicated. If there had been tenderness between them that night, not fueled by alcohol, but by two weary adults finding brief comfort in each other's honesty. What did that mean? She pressed her palm to her forehead. She didn't want to read too much into fleeting warmth. She didn't want to believe a kind sentence meant more than it did. But she also couldn't ignore the ache in her chest, the ache that came from remembering how gently he had looked at her under those lights. Had something in that quiet moment led them to lean on each other later? When the night grew heavier and their hearts felt too tired to stand alone, her phone buzzed beside her, the sound breaking the stillness. She flinched, staring at the screen. It was Michael. "Can we talk?" Just 3 words, small, simple, but her heart thudded once, hard. She stared at the message without answering. The rain outside grew steadier, blurring the world beyond the glass. Her fingers hovered above the screen, uncertain. Was last night a mistake, or something honest they were both too afraid to name? She didn't know yet, but she needed to. Laura's email pinged with an anonymous subject line. "You should hear this?" She paused mid-step in the hallway outside her father's room, one hand still holding the laundry basket against her hip. The message felt like a finger tapped against her spine, uninvited, intrusive. She set the basket down slowly, careful not to make noise. Her father had finally drifted into an afternoon nap, the kind that came only after hours of restlessness. She walked into the living room, sat on the edge of the couch, and clicked the message open. There was no text in the body, just an audio file, no sender name, no introduction. Her pulse quickened. She glanced around her quiet house as if expecting someone to be there, watching. She pressed play. At first, She heard the low murmur of voices in the background, clinking glasses, soft music, wind brushing against an outdoor mic. Then she heard Michael's voice, unmistakable despite the faint distortions. "I hate going home alone," he said, low and tired. I don't think anyone realizes how loud an empty house can be. Laura's breath caught. She knew the moment instantly. It was from the patio under the string lights, but hearing it recorded felt like someone had pulled back a curtain she didn't know existed. She gripped the phone tighter. The audio continued. "I keep thinking I'll get used to it," Michael said. "But every time I unlock that front door, the silence hits me like it's new." Another voice hers responded softly. "I'm sorry, Michael, that sounds hard." She sounded warmer than she remembered. Closer. The recording cut there. Her hand trembled as she paused the file. Someone who had been close enough to hear that private conversation had recorded it. Anne sent it to her, and who knew who else. Her stomach tightened with fear. Not for herself, for him. She replayed the last seconds again, just to be sure. His voice was unmistakably vulnerable. Too vulnerable. The kind of truth a man like him rarely offered anyone. She stood and paced the living room, pressing her palm to her forehead. Whoever sent this wasn't just stirring gossip. They were targeting him, or both of them. She picked up her coat and keys before she fully realized she'd decided to leave the house. She scribbled a note for her father and set it by his water glass. She couldn't sit still. She needed to see Michael, needed to warn him, needed to ask who would do something like this. Traffic crawled along the wet road leading back to the office. The sky hung low, gray and heavy, as if echoing her mood. Her thoughts churned in frantic circles. Someone had been close enough to record them. Someone from the company. Someone from the gala. Someone with a motive. When she reached the building, she walked quickly, hugging her coat against the lingering chill. The office was quieter than usual, midday lull, people at lunch or hiding behind closed doors. But she felt eyes on her anyway. His door was slightly ajar. She knocked softly. "Michael?" He looked up from his desk, startled. He had discarded his tie, and the top button of his shirt was undone, revealing the strain of a long, punishing day. His eyes, usually guarded, were worn. "Laura," he said, standing immediately. "Is everything okay?" She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "No," she whispered. "It's not." He frowned, concerned. What happened? She hesitated only a moment before handing him her phone. "Listen." He tapped play, and the audio filled the room. She watched his face change, first confusion, then recognition, then a deep, tightening shame. His jaw clenched, his shoulders stiffened. When the recording ended, he stayed still for a long moment, staring at the floor as if gathering the pieces of something that had just shattered. "Someone recorded us," he said finally, his voice rough. Someone was close enough to his hands curled into fists. Laura took a step closer, instinctively. "Michael, I'm so sorry." He let out a breath that shook slightly. "I shouldn't have said those things. Not at a work event. Not where anyone could hear." "It wasn't wrong to be honest," she said gently. "You don't understand." He rubbed the back of his neck. The muscles in his arm taut. "People already think there's something between us. Now there's proof that I—" He stopped himself. "Proof that you're human?" she asked softly. He looked at her then, eyes dark with something almost raw. "Proof that I was leaning on someone I shouldn't lean on." The words landed like a quiet blow, not because he meant to hurt her, but because he believed he shouldn't have let himself be vulnerable with her. She stepped forward, lowering her voice. "Michael, you sounded heartbroken." He closed his eyes briefly, the tension in his jaw trembling. She didn't mean to say it that way, but the truth slipped out before she could tame it, and once it was in the air, neither of them could take it back. He opened his eyes, looking at her with a mix of gratitude and pain. "I didn't know anyone heard me. Someone did," she whispered. "And they recorded you. That's not carelessness. That's intention. He swallowed hard. Why would someone do this? I don't know, she said. But it feels deliberate, like someone wants to hurt you. Or us. The word hung between them, us. She didn't correct it. He didn't flinch from it. Rain began tapping against the office window, a steady rhythm that filled the room with a strange, melancholic quiet. Michael finally sat down, rubbing his forehead. This is only going to make things worse with HR. Then we deal with it together, she said immediately. He looked up, startled by her certainty. You don't have to protect me alone, she added, her voice steady despite the fear trembling beneath it. Whatever this is, we face it together. For a long moment, he just watched her. Not with guilt, not with worry, with something else, something he didn't know how to name yet. Before he could speak, her phone buzzed again. Anonymous number. Another message. Her heart dropped as she tapped it open. There's more. Her breath halted. Michael stood, reading over her shoulder. More recordings, more evidence, more traps. They didn't know yet, but someone was watching, and they weren't finished. Michael found an envelope on his desk, her handwriting painfully steady. It lay there in the center of the wood surface as if she had taken time to place it gently, almost tenderly, before walking away. The late afternoon sun seeped through the blinds in amber stripes, brushing the envelope with a soft glow that only made the moment feel heavier. He stood still for a long time, hand hovering before finally reaching for it. The paper felt warm, as though her touch still lingered. His name was written in blue ink, careful and even. The way she wrote meeting notes, never rushed, always clear. He knew, before he even opened it, that whatever was inside would break something open in him. He eased into his chair and unfolded the letter slowly. Michael, I want to thank you for the way you've treated me these past 8 months. You've never raised your voice at me, never dismissed my ideas, never made me feel small. I needed that more than you know. He swallowed hard. The words blurred for a moment before he forced himself to continue. But I can't keep putting you or myself at risk. My father needs me to have this job. I can't afford to become part of a rumor that grows larger every day. I've already submitted a request for transfer to the Denver office. I think it's the safest option for everyone. Please don't blame yourself. This isn't your fault. Laura, he lowered the letter, unable to breathe for a moment. Denver? She was leaving the state. She wasn't just stepping away. She was removing herself entirely. He stared at the wall across from him, but all he could see was the empty chair she would no longer sit in, the unopened notepad she kept on the corner of her desk, the way she tilted her head slightly when she listened to him, as though trying to catch the meaning beneath his words, the way she had looked at him just yesterday, when he told her they would face things together. He pressed his thumb to the bridge of his nose, fighting the pressure building behind his eyes. The office outside his door hummed with its usual rhythms, phones ringing, keyboards tapping, but it all felt faint, distant. The sunset cast a deeper orange across the room, turning everything soft and blurred, like a memory forming in real time. He read the letter again, slower this time. She was thanking him, and walking away. He felt grief settle in his chest like a weight he hadn't expected. Not this soon, not like this. Losing colleagues, losing connections, losing people. He had grown used to that over the years. But this felt different. It wasn't just the loss of an assistant. It was the loss of something that had barely begun to breathe. A soft knock sounded on the glass wall beside his office door. A coworker, a young analyst, glanced in and lifted a hand as if to ask a question. But when he saw the look on Michael's face, he lowered his hand and walked away. Even through the blur of his pain, Michael realized how exposed he must look. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, then rose to his feet. The office felt too small, too full of echoes her laughter in the hallway, her voice reminding him of meetings, her footsteps outside his door each morning. He couldn't sit there any longer. He grabbed his coat from the hook by the door, his movements stiff, almost mechanical, As he stepped into the hallway, the last of the sunlight washed over him through the big west-facing windows. It made his shadow stretch long across the carpet, thin and solitary. He passed coworkers without really seeing them. Some glanced up, others lowered their eyes, pretending not to watch him. Maybe they sensed the shift in him, a man unraveling quietly, trying to keep the pieces from scattering in public. He pushed open the glass doors to the stairwell. The enclosed space felt cooler, the air sharper, easier to breathe for a moment. He descended slowly, gripping the railing, feeling each step in his legs. The grief sat in his chest like a stone. Outside, the evening sky had turned a deep wash of blue. Streetlights flickered on, stretching long reflections across the wet pavement. The wind carried a faint scent of pine from the nearby park, but none of it eased the hollow thudding in his ribs. He walked across the parking lot without knowing where he was going. His breath came shallow, his vision unfocused at the edges. The envelope felt heavy in his coat pocket, its presence undeniable. He paused near his car but didn't open the door. Instead, he leaned back against the cool metal and closed his eyes. Losing his job didn't scare him. Losing her did. The realization hit him with a clean, sharp clarity that left him stunned. He had spent years telling himself he didn't need anyone. That solitude was safer, predictable, manageable, but the thought of Laura leaving, walking away from the company, from the city, from him, lit a sense of panic he hadn't felt in years. And then, quietly, painfully, another question rose in him. Was he really going to let her go without a word, without fighting for the truth of what they had shared that night under the lights, without even telling her what it meant to him, now that he remembered the sound of her laughter, the warmth in her eyes when she told him he was easy to talk to? His chest tightened. He opened his eyes to the dusk, to the empty spaces around him. Everyone else in his life had walked away. His marriage, his son, friendships he let fade, family he never called. Was he going to add her name to that list? The wind picked up, brushing against his collar. He stood motionless, breathing in the cold air, letting the question settle into him with a kind of trembling truth. Somewhere inside him, something shifted, something small, something stubborn, and something terrified of losing her before he even understood what she had begun to mean. He didn't know what to do yet, but he knew one thing with startling certainty. He couldn't let her disappear into Denver without trying. Rain streaked down Laura's window when the knock came slow, steady, almost apologetic. She froze in the middle of rinsing a mug, the warm water running over her fingers as she strained to listen. It wasn't the loud, hurried knock of a delivery driver. It was softer, hesitant. She turned off the faucet and wiped her hands on a towel, her heart thudding with a mix of dread and hope she didn't want to acknowledge. She walked slowly toward the door, the wooden floor creaking under her steps. When she looked through the peephole, her breath caught. Michael stood on her porch, drenched from the downpour. His coat clung to him, darkened by the rain, and his hair was plastered against his forehead. He looked exhausted, not from the weather, but from something deeper, something that had driven him here, despite every reason to stay away. She opened the door. "Michael," she whispered. "You're soaked." He tried to smile, but it faltered. "I should have called. I didn't know how else to reach you." She stepped aside. "Come in." He walked inside slowly, as if unsure he had the right. She closed the door behind him and reached for a towel. When she handed it to him, their fingertips brushed for a split second, just long enough for her to feel the cold in his hands and the warmth underneath it. "Sit down," she said gently. He nodded and moved toward the small kitchen table, the one she'd bought secondhand when she first took care of her father, full-time. He sat down, folding the towel over his hair once, then setting it in his lap. Rain tapped a soft rhythm on the window, filling the silence that stretched between them. She took the seat across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, he exhaled. "I got your letter." Her chest tightened. "I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do." "I know why you wrote it," he said quietly. "But He shook his head. I couldn't just let it end like that. She looked down at her hands. I don't want to hurt you, or put you in a position where people question your integrity. And I don't want you to feel pushed out of your own job, he replied, his voice rough. You've worked too hard for that. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of how much each was trying to protect the other, even if it meant tearing themselves apart. Laura reached for the mug she'd set aside earlier, then stopped, unsure what she meant to do with her hands. She placed them flat on the table instead. I remembered more from that night, she said softly. He straightened. You did, she nodded. I remembered us talking, outside, under the lights. You told me about your house, about the silence. He looked down, almost embarrassed. I didn't mean for anyone else to hear that. I know. She paused, but I heard it, and it mattered to me. He breathed in carefully, as if each word she said carried weight. I remembered laughing, she continued. I don't even know what we were laughing about, but I remember how you looked at me after, like you hadn't laughed in a long time. His jaw tensed, emotion flickering behind his eyes. Laura, he said slowly, whatever people think happened, we know what didn't happen. Nothing physical did. I know. She agreed. But something happened, he murmured, almost too quietly. She felt her pulse quicken. Yes, something did. He looked out the kitchen window, watching the rain trail down the glass. I keep replaying the fact that we ended up leaning on each other when we walked to the hotel. I don't remember it, but I can understand how it happened. So can I, she said. He turned back to her, his voice warm but shaking slightly. I wasn't trying to cross a line. I wasn't trying to make things complicated. You didn't, she whispered. I did too. I was there with you. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped tightly. I came here tonight because I needed you to know. I don't regret the part where we talked, or laughed, or sat under those lights without pretending. Her breath hitched. I don't regret it either. The rain outside deepened, a steady curtain of sound that held the moment gently between them. Laura's fingers curled slightly on the table, uncertain. She wasn't brave enough to reach for him. Not yet, not with everything at stake. But she let her hand drift a little closer, stopping just inches from his, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin, close enough for him to notice, close enough for it to matter. He looked down at the small space between their hands, and she saw something soften in him, something tender and unguarded. If nothing happened, he said quietly, why does everything feel different now? Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. Because sometimes the things we don't remember still change us. He held her gaze, the silence stretching but not breaking. The kitchen light reflected softly in his eyes, and for the first time since the gala, she saw him without the shield of professionalism, without the weight of the office pressing on him. Just a man, tired, honest, searching for something he hadn't realized he was missing. The clock on the wall ticked once, marking the fragile moment between past and something unnamed. She drew in a breath, steady but trembling. Michael, she whispered, what are we supposed to do now? He didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, but because the truth, whatever it was, hadn't fully formed yet. And outside, the rain kept falling. HR called again this time. The tone was final. Michael stared at the blinking light on his office phone long after the call ended. The blinds behind him cast long gray lines across his desk, slicing the morning light into thin, uneven strips. It felt symbolic in a way he wished it didn't. Everything in his life seemed fractured, bent, divided between what he wanted and what he was allowed to want. He rubbed his thumb across the edge of his keyboard, listening to the distant hum of conversations outside his door. People were talking softly again, the way they had all week. He didn't need to hear the words to know they were about him, about her, about something no one understood, including himself. When he finally stood, his knees felt stiff, as though anxiety had been sitting inside his bones for days. He walked down the hallway toward HR, each step echoing faintly, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Laura was already sitting in the waiting area. She looked small in the gray chair, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. When she sensed him, she lifted her gaze. That single look hit him harder than any accusation could. She wasn't angry, she wasn't ashamed, she just looked tired. As if all of this had taken something from her she didn't have to spare. "Morning," he said quietly. "Hi," she whispered. They didn't touch. They didn't lean closer. They just sat near each other in that hushed corridor, connected by the weight neither of them knew how to carry. A door opened. Laura, Michael. "We're ready." Inside, the room felt colder than last time. The blinds were half drawn, leaving a single line of light across the table that neither wanted to sit too close to. The HR manager, a woman with sharp glasses and a voice that always sounded like she was about to deliver bad news, folded her hands. "We've concluded our review." Michael braced himself. "As stated in company policy," she continued, "supervisor-subordinate relationships, whether personal, emotional, or potentially intimate, present a conflict of interest." "We're not," Laura began, but the manager held up a hand. "I understand. We are not alleging misconduct, but the situation has created discomfort within your team. For that reason, one of you must leave the reporting line." Michael felt the words like a cold splash down his spine. He exchanged a glance with Laura. She looked as if she were bracing for impact. The manager went on, "Laura, your transfer request has been approved. You'll move to the Denver team next month." Michael's stomach tightened. That wasn't a reassignment, it was a removal. Laura blinked. The muscles around her eyes tightened, the smallest flicker of hurt crossing her face. She nodded slowly, as if accepting something she hadn't agreed to. "She's not the problem," Michael said, his voice quiet but firm. The manager sighed. "Perception is reality in workplace dynamics. This situation primarily concerns the subordinate's role. It's more complicated for you to transfer." "Because my title is higher," he said. "That's part of it." He knew the rest of it without being told. He was harder to move. She was easier to sacrifice. Laura's voice finally broke through, soft, strained. "I don't want them thinking I did something wrong." Michael felt something tighten painfully inside him. "You didn't. But this still ends with me leaving," she whispered. The HR manager closed the folder in front of her, signaling the discussion was over. "Thank you both. We'll follow up by email." Michael walked out of the room with a kind of numbness he hadn't felt since the day his wife packed her belongings and left. Laura walked a step behind him, her breaths uneven. When they reached the corner of the hallway where paths diverged, his office to the left, hers to the right, they stopped. She didn't speak. She just looked at him, eyes shining with a thin layer of disbelief, sorrow, and something else, something like apology. "I'm sorry." "Michael," she murmured. He shook his head. "Don't be... This isn't your fault." She tried to smile, but her voice cracked. "I'm the one being moved." He stepped closer. Not close enough to touch her, just close enough for her to hear him without anyone else catching a word. "It shouldn't be you." "It is," she whispered. He felt the truth hit him, then not gradual, but sudden, a sharp weight landing all at once. He had power. She didn't. And even though he never meant to create that imbalance, it had shaped everything. It had carved out the path they were being forced to walk now. She swallowed. "I'll be okay." He didn't believe that, not when he saw how tight her hands were clasped, not when he heard the thin tremble in her voice, not when he remembered the rain on her kitchen window the night before. She hesitated, then stepped away first. "Laura," she paused, waiting, but he couldn't find the right words. She gave him a small nod, then turned and walked down the hallway, her figure growing smaller with each step. He watched until she disappeared into the turn. The building felt too quiet, too still. He walked back toward his office, but halfway there, his breath shortened, like something had closed around his ribs. He leaned a hand against the wall, trying to steady himself. He'd been through divorce, loneliness, the slow erosion of a marriage that had once meant everything. But this strange, fragile connection with Laura felt like losing something he hadn't even been allowed to name. He straightened slowly, the decision forming inside him before he had words for it. If someone had to step aside, if someone had to lose a title, a role, a position, it wasn't going to be her. By the time he reached his office, his pulse had steadied into a grim, determined rhythm. He opened his laptop. He drafted the email. He read it once, then again. His resignation from the leadership team. Not the company, just the role that kept Laura under him. His hands trembled slightly as he hovered over the send button. One click would change everything. He thought of her letter, her kitchen, the space between their hands. Then he pressed send, and as the message vanished from his screen, a single question lodged itself painfully in his chest. Would she ever forgive him for making the decision alone? The underground garage hummed with a cold echo as Laura ran down the ramp. Her footsteps bounced off the concrete walls, sharp and uneven, like her breath. The fluorescent lights flickered above her, catching the edges of parked cars and casting long, pale shadows across the floor. Somewhere in that dim maze, she knew he was leaving. She spotted him near the far corner. Michael, loading a final box into the trunk of his sedan. His shoulders were hunched, his movement steady but weighed down. He didn't look like a man starting something new. He looked like someone closing a door he wished he could keep open. Michael, her voice cracked down the garage, raw, a little desperate. He turned, the sight of her running toward him, hair loose, eyes bright with fear and disbelief, made something inside him tighten. He set the box down and stepped back from the car, giving her space, maybe giving himself space too. She didn't slow. She stopped only when she stood a few feet from him, chest rising and falling as if she'd run farther than the ramp. "You didn't have to lose everything," she said. The words came out soft but trembling, as if she'd held them in too long. He looked at her for a beat, taking in the pain in her expression, the exhaustion beneath it. "I didn't lose anything that mattered," he said quietly. The words hit her like a warm ache. Her throat tightened. "Your position mattered. You worked for that." He shook his head slowly. "Titles don't keep you company when you go home. They don't sit at your kitchen table. They don't listen when you talk." He paused. "They don't matter the way you think they do." She swallowed hard. The echo of rain from last night on the window, on his jacket, felt too close, too intimate. "You shouldn't have made a decision like that alone." "It wasn't alone," he said. "It was because of you." She stepped back a little, as if the sentence pushed her. "That's exactly what terrifies me." Michael frowned slightly. "Laura." "No," she whispered, lifting a hand to steady her breath. "You can't make choices that change your life because of something we don't even understand yet." He let her words settle. He didn't rush to fill the silence. His eyes searched hers, patient, hurting, but steady. She looked at the pavement instead, her voice thinning. "My whole life has been about keeping things stable. For my dad, for my job, for myself." Her lips pressed into a small, strained line. "I don't know how to deal with someone choosing me over everything." He stepped closer, still careful, still giving her room. The garage light caught the silver at his temples, the lines at the corners of his eyes. He looked older than he had last week, but also softer, as if something heavy had finally fallen off him. "I didn't choose you over everything," he said. "I chose to stop living a life that felt empty." Her breath hitched. The honesty in his voice was too bare, too unguarded. He continued. "I didn't realize how lonely I was until that night, until we talked, until you looked at me like I wasn't just some title on a door." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words wash over a place inside her she'd kept locked for years. When she opened them again, she looked almost fragile. "I was scared," she admitted. "I still am." He nodded once, slow, accepting, of what her jaw trembled before she could steady it. "Of losing you." The sentence left her like an exhale she'd been holding for months. It hovered in the cold garage, air soft, shaking, but finally real. Michael breathed in sharply, not expecting the confession even though he'd felt the weight of it for days. He didn't touch her, he wouldn't. Not until she crossed that space herself. But his voice softened into something deep and steady. "You're not going to lose me." Her eyes glistened, not with dramatic tears, but with something quieter, years of held-in emotion finding a crack. "But you're starting over," she said faintly. "And I don't know what that means. For you, for us, for anything." He glanced at the open trunk behind him, at the cardboard boxes holding pieces of a life he no longer needed to protect. Then he looked back at her. At almost 50, he murmured, "You don't start over with a plan, you start over with a choice." She stepped closer, drawn to something she couldn't quite name. "And what choice is that?" she asked. He held her gaze, the garage lights reflecting softly in his tired, steady eyes. But he didn't answer, not yet. The silence between them was filled with possibilities neither of them dared to say aloud. The low hum of a ventilation fan, the distant sound of a car door slamming on another level, the faint smell of oil and cold concrete, all of it wrapped around them like a pause in a life that had been moving too fast. A new beginning hovered just inches from them, but so did fear. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Michael, what do you start over with?" At almost 50, he looked at her, the question settling into the deepest part of him where hope and uncertainty intertwined. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Not yet. 3 months later, the boxes in Michael's new office still sat unopened. They were pushed against the wall like forgotten luggage, collecting a thin layer of dust in the soft afternoon light. The space itself felt temporary bare desk. 2 chairs, a single lamp, but there was a kind of peace in that emptiness. A quiet beginning he hadn't expected to appreciate. He stood by the window, looking down at the parking lot below, sipping coffee from a paper cup he'd grabbed on the way in. The consulting firm he'd started was small, just him, a part-time administrator, and a client list that grew at a slow but steady pace. Some mornings he woke unsure if he'd made a terrible mistake. Other mornings he felt lighter than he had in years. But almost every morning, at some point, he thought about her. Laura. She called sometimes. He called sometimes. Their conversations were never long, never overly emotional, but always steady, familiar, like 2 people learning to breathe again after holding their lungs too tight. That afternoon, she appeared on his phone screen with a short message. "Dad has a good day. I'm taking him out for a walk. If you're free." He was already reaching for his jacket before she finished typing. When he arrived at her house, the late autumn sun was soft behind drifting clouds. Her father sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, blinking up at the sky as if trying to place the season. Laura stood beside him, tying her hair into a loose knot. When she looked up and saw Michael, her face eased in a quiet way, like someone relaxing into a familiar chair. "You came fast," she said. "I was nearby," he replied, though he hadn't been. It didn't matter. Her father watched him with a kind of distant curiosity. Michael stepped closer and nodded politely. "Good afternoon, sir." The older man tilted his head. "Do I know you?" Laura opened her mouth, ready to navigate the careful explanations she'd learned to repeat. But Michael crouched gently beside the porch, keeping his tone soft. "I'm a friend," he said. "Only if that's all right with you." Her father gave a slow nod, as if the word friend carried a weight he recognized. They walked down the sidewalk together, her father between them, his steps unsteady but determined. The leaves along the curb were turning, pale gold and deep brown, brushing against their shoes with each step. Laura looped her arm through her father's for balance. Michael walked beside her, hands in his pockets, matching their pace. The conversation drifted around simple things. The weather, the maple tree that needed trimming, a neighbor's dog that barked as they passed. Nothing significant, yet each word felt like a stitch, repairing the fabric of some unspoken bond. Later, when her father grew tired, Michael helped guide him back to the house. The older man rested in his recliner, breathing slow and even. Laura tucked a blanket over his legs and then motioned to the kitchen. They stood by the counter, both reaching for the same mug. Their hands brushed lightly, neither pulling away too quickly. That brief touch held a warmth that neither dared name. "How's work?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Starting from scratch is humbling." She nodded. "Humbling can be good. Sometimes it feels like I'm rebuilding a life I don't fully understand yet." Laura leaned back against the counter, studying him. He looked tired but lighter, as if the world pressed on him a little less. "You're doing better than you think." "I don't know," he admitted. "I keep wondering if I can build anything worth sharing." The words slipped out before he meant them to, and he looked away, embarrassed. She let the silence linger, giving him room. "You already are," she said gently. "You just can't see it yet." He met her eyes, the quiet sincerity in her tone hitting him harder than he expected. It was strange how healing could come from someone simply believing in you. Later that week, he returned to help with yard work. He trimmed branches while Laura raked leaves into neat piles. They worked mostly without talking, the kind of silence that wasn't heavy but comfortable. When she handed him a bottle of water, their fingers brushed again, an echo of the touch in the kitchen. As they rested on the porch steps, her father shuffled outside, blinking as if searching for something or someone. His gaze landed on Michael, then on Laura. With surprising clarity, he smiled a small, knowing smile. "Is that the man who makes you smile?" he asked, his voice thin but certain. Laura froze. Her breath caught. The question hung in the cool air, fragile as a leaf suspended before falling. Michael didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched her. Her startled eyes, her trembling exhale, the faint color rising in her cheeks. Her father waited, hands resting on his lap like folded memories. "You look happy when he's here," he murmured, drifting back into softer thoughts. Laura looked away, unable to form words. The truth of it pressed gently but firmly against her chest. Happy. It had been so long since she'd considered the word. Michael stood slowly, unsure if he should stay or leave, unsure if her silence meant fear or hope or both tangled together. She finally met his eyes, something warm but uncertain flickering there. The moment stretched between them, tender, unspoken, fragile. Was she ready to let this become real? Neither of them knew. Not yet. But the question lingered, settling softly in the space between their quiet breaths. A string of warm lights glowed above her backyard, soft as candle flames. The bulbs swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting small circles of gold across the grass and the old wooden table she'd set with mismatched plates. Laura stood beneath the lights, smoothing the edge of a tablecloth that didn't really need smoothing. Her hands were restless, not from nerves exactly, but from the weight of meaning she sensed in this small invitation. When the gate clicked, she lifted her head. Michael stepped in, pausing for a moment as if taking in the scene overwhelmed him. The lights reflected in his eyes, softening the lines at the corners. He held a bottle of apple cider under his arm, and a faint smile pulled at his mouth. "This looks beautiful," he said. "It's simple," she replied, though a quiet warmth spread across her chest at his expression. "Simple is good," he murmured. They moved toward the table. Her garden wasn't large, just a few raised beds, some lavender along the fence, a maple tree that leaned a little left as if tired from too many seasons. But under the lights, it looked like a sanctuary. Dinner was roasted chicken, warm bread, and a salad she'd made that afternoon. Nothing fancy. But when he tasted the chicken, he laughed softly, surprised. "This is better than half the restaurants I've eaten at." She smiled, shaking her head. "My dad always liked simple food. I guess I stuck with it." They ate slowly, letting the conversation drift the way the evening breeze did, gentle, unhurried. They talked about work, about her father's better days and harder days, about the little victories that made life feel manageable again, about the things they'd left behind in their old lives, and the things they were still learning to live without. Then Michael glanced up, a thoughtful crease forming between his brows. What do you want the next decade to look like? Laura froze. The question wasn't dramatic, but it held a quiet depth she wasn't used to. She played with the edge of her napkin, buying herself a moment. I don't know, she said. I've spent so long fitting my life around caregiving and work. I never thought about what I actually want. He nodded, not pressing her. It's hard to imagine what's ahead when you've been carrying so much. And you? She asked, lifting her gaze. He exhaled a long, steady breath, as if the answer carried weight. I want peace, he said, not the lonely kind. The kind where you feel like you're choosing your life, not drifting through it. I want mornings that don't feel empty, evenings that don't echo. His words thinned something inside her chest, something tender and easily bruised. And someone to share it with, she asked quietly. He held her eyes, steady but vulnerable. If it's the right person, yes. Her throat tightened. She looked down at her plate, afraid of the hope flickering inside her. Hope, after so many years of holding her breath, felt dangerous. I'm not good at this, she admitted, letting someone in, expecting anything. I'm scared to want too much. He leaned back slightly, absorbing every word. Laura, I'm scared too. I'm afraid of being a disappointment. Afraid I won't be enough. She shook her head. That's not possible. But even as she said it, she felt the tug of worry deep inside. Loving someone meant risking what she'd spent years protecting: her steady routines, her father's care, the fragile balance she'd worked so hard to maintain. The sky darkened above them. A sliver of moon peeked through drifting clouds. The warm lights overhead hummed softly, creating a small world just for them. They sat in that hush, neither able to speak for a moment. Then Michael reached for his glass of cider and set it down again without drinking. His hand lingered on the table, fingers relaxed but open, resting near hers. He didn't reach farther, he didn't rush, but the quiet offering in that small gesture made her heartbeat stumble. She looked at his hand for a long breath, then at him. He watched her with a softness that felt new, steady, patient, letting her come to her own decision. Her fingers moved first, almost of their own accord. She lifted her hand and let it drift toward his, hesitating at the last inch. The warmth from his skin brushed the tips of her fingers even before they touched, but she didn't pull away. He took a slow breath, and then very gently, he moved his hand the last small distance, covering hers with his palm. Their fingers threaded together, tentative at first, then settling into place like they had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. Her breath caught, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt like the first real moment of truth between them. He squeezed her hand once, slow and careful. Laura, he murmured, voice low, I don't want to rush anything, but I want to be here, with you, however this grows. She looked down at their joined hands, the sight both grounding and frightening. I want that too, she whispered. I just don't know how to trust it yet. I know, he said. We'll figure it out. The wind brushed the lights overhead, sending small shadows dancing across the table. For a moment, the world felt still quietly suspended in possibility. She let herself hold his hand a little tighter. The night air pressed around them softly, wrapping the moment in a tender, uncertain warmth. Could they trust this late life beginning? Laura wasn't sure, but she wanted to try. And wanting after so many years of silence felt like a beginning in itself. Laura woke to the sound of someone fixing the loose fence her father had always meant to repair. The tapping was steady, unhurried, the kind of rhythm that came from a person who wasn't trying to impress anyone, just trying to help. She slipped on a sweater and stepped onto the back porch, the cool morning air brushing her cheeks. Michael stood by the fence line, sleeves rolled up, a toolbox open beside him. The early light caught in the flecks of silver at his temples as he tightened a hinge with slow precision. He didn't hear her at first. He was humming under his breath, something low and familiar, a tune she couldn't place. You're here early, she said softly. He looked up, startled, then smiled, The hinge kept rattling in the wind last night. Thought I'd get to it before the day got busy. You didn't have to. I know, he replied. I wanted to. She stood on the porch a moment longer, watching him work. There was something grounding about the sight. A man who didn't rush, didn't posture, didn't fill silence with noise, just presence, quietly offering itself. Inside, her father stirred in his recliner. Laura made breakfast oatmeal with a little honey and checked his medications. When she stepped back outside, Michael was carrying the last of the tools toward the shed. Fence should hold now, he said, brushing off his hands. You didn't even have coffee yet. I grabbed one on the way. He lifted a paper cup in explanation. Thought you might still be asleep. She wasn't used to anyone considering her sleep, her time, her rest. The thought made her heart tighten. Over the next week, he kept showing up not every day, not in a way that felt overwhelming, but with the kind of consistency that eased itself into her routines without forcing anything. One evening, he brought groceries when she was too tired to shop. Another day, he raked leaves while she helped her father through a difficult afternoon. Sometimes they walked quietly through the neighborhood at dusk, saying little, sharing the kind of silence that didn't feel like pressure. Their connection deepened not through grand gestures, but through small, steady ones, him repairing a loose step, her leaving a container of soup on his porch, both of them reaching out in ways they barely realized. But late one afternoon, Laura found herself standing at the sink, staring out the window at the backyard where he knelt repairing another section of the fence. A strange thought grew inside her. Do I deserve this? After all the mistakes, after all the hurt? Her chest tightened with the weight of it. She wasn't young anymore. She wasn't carefree or easy or uncomplicated. She carried responsibilities, grief, years of exhaustion engraved into her bones. And he was beginning again too, carrying his own quiet scars. Maybe that was why this felt fragile, precious, too good to trust. When she stepped outside with 2 glasses of iced tea, he looked up, brushing dirt off his hands. Thank you, he said, taking one. They sat on the porch steps, their shoulders almost touching. Her father rested inside, the television murmuring faintly through the open window. The world felt paused in a gentle way, like a page held open in a well-worn book. You're doing too much, she murmured. I'm doing what I want, he replied. That's what scares me. He turned toward her, brows knitting. Why? She hesitated, fingers tightening around her glass. Because I don't know how to need someone without expecting it to disappear. He looked away, letting her words settle. I get that, he said quietly. I spent years thinking I didn't deserve anything good. That wanting more was asking too much. You, she said, surprised. Yeah, he sighed. But I'm learning it's okay to have hope again. She stared at the yard, feeling something loosen inside her. Maybe they were both slowly letting themselves believe in the possibility of another chance. Later that evening, her father wandered outside, blinking in the fading light. His steps were slow, careful. Michael rose immediately, guiding him toward the chair by the garden. You all right, sir? He asked gently. Her father looked up, eyes cloudy, but searching. His hand trembled as he reached slightly toward Michael's sleeve, as if trying to place a memory. For a moment, his expression sharpened with rare clarity. He looked at Michael with a recognition that went deeper than memory. Don't leave her alone, he whispered. The words were frail but certain, slipping out like a long-held truth. Michael froze not in fear, but in something like quiet awe. He crouched beside the older man, steadying the blanket on his knees. I won't, he said softly. Laura felt the words hit her chest. She swallowed hard, emotion rising like a tide. Her father drifted back into confusion moments later, but the message lingered, heavy and tender. When Michael stood again, his gaze met hers. Something unspoken passed between them, something fragile, honest, and deeply human. He stepped closer, not touching her, not crowding her, just standing with her in the gathering dusk. Laura, he said, voice low. "I'm not going anywhere unless you ask me to." She looked at him, heart unsteady, breath caught between fear and longing. Was she ready to let him stay? She didn't answer. Not yet. The evening air folded around them, warm lights flickering on as the sky dimmed, holding the moment in a gentle, lingering stillness. A single candle flickered at the end of the garden table, its flame bending gently against the evening breeze. The backyard was quiet except for the soft croak of distant tree frogs and the rustle of leaves shifting above the fence line. Laura pulled her sweater tighter, feeling the cool air settle around her shoulders as twilight deepened. Michael stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of tea, steam curling into the dusk like ghostly ribbons. "Chamomile," he said, setting one in front of her. "With a little honey, the way you like it." She looked up at him, her smile small but steady. "Thank you." He eased into the chair across from her, the candlelight catching the lines around his eyes, lines carved by years of disappointment. Quiet battles, and the kind of loneliness a man rarely admits aloud. But tonight, those lines looked softer somehow, as if the last months had worn the sharp edges down. "You did the yard again," she said, noticing the trimmed hedges, the clean stone path, the new screw placed in the loose gate latch. He shrugged lightly. It needed it. "You don't have to keep fixing things here." He wrapped his hands around his mug. "It makes me feel useful." Then, almost too quietly, "And it keeps me close." The confession hung between them, tender and unforced, like something he'd been carrying for weeks. Laura's breath caught. She wasn't used to gentle honesty. It always felt like the world expected her to be strong, steady, endlessly capable, a woman who handled everything, a woman who needed nothing, but not tonight. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their tea as the last threads of daylight slipped behind the trees. The warmth of the cup seeped through her palms, calming her chest. He cleared his throat. "Can I tell you something?" His voice was careful, like he didn't want to disturb the softness between them. She nodded. "You brought me back to myself," he said. "I didn't realize how long I'd been half alive, going through motions, filling my days with work so I wouldn't notice how empty everything else had become." Laura swallowed hard. His words touched something vulnerable inside her, something she had buried under responsibilities and worry and years of caretaking. "I didn't do that," she whispered. "You did." He shook his head gently. "You reminded me what it felt like to matter. To someone." His gaze lifted to hers, steady but searching. "I didn't think I'd ever have that again." She felt tears gather behind her eyes, but didn't let them fall. Instead, she reached across the table, her fingertips brushing the back of his hand. He turned his palm upward, offering it fully, without hesitation, without fear. Their fingers wove together like it was the most natural thing in the world. No declarations, no promises carved in stone, just presence. The candle flame trembled brighter, reflecting in the sheen of her eyes. "I worry sometimes," he admitted, voice cracking slightly, "that I don't have much to offer anymore. I don't have fancy titles. I'm starting over at an age when most people are settling down. I'm learning from scratch, making mistakes, trying to figure out who I am without everything I used to hide behind." She squeezed his hand. "You offer the one thing that matters." He blinked, surprised. "What's that?" "Your heart," she said. "And it's more than enough." He exhaled a long, shaky breath that sounded like something releasing inside him. Relief. Gratitude. Maybe both. The garden lights clicked on automatically, casting a warm glow across the backyard. The fence he had mended earlier stood straight and steady. Her father slept inside, the house quiet. The night felt like it was holding its breath around them. He stood slowly and came around to her side of the table. She rose too, the movement instinctive, as if pulled by an invisible thread. They stopped just inches apart. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the years they had lived, the wounds they carried, the hope neither had expected this late in life. The quiet understanding that nothing about this was rushed or desperate. It was earned. It was real. He lifted a hand to her cheek, brushing a strand of hair away. She closed her eyes, leaning gently into the warmth of his touch. Then their foreheads met soft, unhurried, the kind of closeness that didn't demand anything more. His breath mingled with hers, no urgency, no fear, only the slow merging of two lives that had learned, the hard way, how precious a second chance could be. "You're sure?" he whispered, the last trace of doubt trembling in his voice. She nodded, her words barely audible. "Yes, I'm sure." He pulled her into an embrace, holding her with the tenderness of a man who understood the weight of being given another chance. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat beneath his shirt, the quiet promise of presence, not perfection. Above them, the candle on the garden table flickered once, twice, then steadied again. And somewhere between the warmth of his arms and the soft hum of crickets in the night, a single question lingered in the air. When two people find love late, does it become more precious because of everything it took to reach it? The answer waited in the spaces between their breaths, unfolding gently as they stood together under the soft glow of evening. Sometimes, healing begins in the small, quiet places we once walked past without noticing. A kitchen table with chipped edges, a soft light over a backyard fence. The simple presence of someone who chooses to stay, not because they have to, but because something in them understands our loneliness. We spend so much of adulthood holding ourselves together, convincing the world we're fine. But the truth is, most of us are just looking for a moment where we can exhale without fear. And sometimes, that moment comes from another person who has been just as tired, just as unsure, just as bruised by life as we are. Maybe that's the real lesson buried inside. All the hurt love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, in 2 mugs of tea set gently on a table, or in the way someone shows up when they could have walked away. And when it does, it reminds us that even after years of loss, there is still a part of the heart waiting to be chosen. If this story found a soft place in you, let it sit there for a while. Some things are meant to grow slowly, and some hopes return only when we're finally ready to hold them again. Thank you for spending a little of your day with this story. Your presence here, listening, feeling, pausing with it, truly matters more than you know. If the journey touched something in you, a gentle share or subscribe helps us send more kindness and understanding into the world. Wishing you a quiet moment of peace tonight and something soft to hold on to tomorrow.